Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, February 8th. Also a great pleasure to be joined here in our studio by two distinguished historians from our area. We're really pleased to have with us today Bill Budde, who is the curator of the Russell Collection down at the Martha Canfield Library in Arlington, and Shawn Harrington is the curator of the Manchester Historical Society up in Manchester. Gentlemen, thank you for coming by and making the time for this.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for the invite.
Well, I've been long wanting to have the two of you here to talk about the history of our area, which is so fascinating and rich, and what, over 250 or so years since the first European settlers began arriving. But before we get into some of that, and we have a few artifacts here to show the viewers as well, I thought I'd just start by asking both of you what each of your organizations do, you know, kind of what your missions are, and kind of how do you each operate in terms of gathering the historical artifacts and information that you have. Bill, why don't we start with you?
Okay, the Russell collection was started by Dr. Russell, who was the local town physician for, I think, 50-some years. Avid historian. He started collecting historic material when he was 12, before he moved here. And he built on that over the years. I don't know if it's fortunate, but he was at people's bedsides when they were elderly and old, considering their end of life and not knowing what to do with their belongings and things, and looking to the future. And he was able to be forthright enough to say, well, you know, if you have something that you'd like about the family or the history to preserve, you know, I'd be willing to add it to the collection. And he did that over the years. It started off in his home and outgrew his home. In the 1960s, the town added on to the current Canfield brick building in town. Special room on the back to house his collection. And it's continued to grow. We continually get donations. Two here are fairly recent, in the past 2 years. But the oldest material dates back to 1757, and it was carried up here from Connecticut when the very first settlers moved here. Russell collection deals mainly with written and paper-based material. We have very few artifacts. It's a problem with storage. We have a few artifacts that have been donated. The barber chair that was in the town hall for many years that Larry Malloy used was considered a historic item and has been donated. And that's, you know, the original projector from the movie theater on Sunderland Hill Road has been donated too. But we don't have a place to display those, so we're working on getting a museum location so that people can actually see these things and share them. But word of mouth, and people find things. Again, as parents pass on or go into assisted living, they or their children and relatives will donate materials.
Wow, okay. Wow. Is that the way it works at the Historical Society of Manchester, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, much of the same. In the Manchester Historical Society, this year is actually celebrating its 125th anniversary. And it was started in 1897, primarily by members of the Hawley family, the Purdy family, Hermione Canfield, and Theodore Swift. And it was actually established in what was then called the Pink House, the Hawley House, which was a couple doors north of Dellwood Cemetery. And it was, you know, to collect and preserve both written history, oral history, artifacts, documents, photographs. And over the years, it's ebbed and flowed, but you know, the collection is, you know, we still have pieces of the founding collection. We have a powder horn that was found in a barn up near the Arts Center, with, you know, has been loosely linked with Seth Warner's. You know, I mean, you know, sometimes we don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Right.
I know that.
Why not?
And you know, but it's mostly been associated with, you know, starting in 1897, really with the Mark Skinner Library. There was always kind of a spot in there, and that relationship has continued through the current Manchester Community Library, where we actually have our archives room. And speaking of storage space, one of the things that we had struggled with for a number of years was our large artifacts, and we'd counted on the kindness of supporters who would allow us to use barns, and a few years ago an opportunity presented itself where a 19th century home was donated to us, and I said, well, why don't we just turn that into a kind of a glorified barn, so to speak? We don't have to worry about the systems, and we have a place for our environmentally controlled, ephemera. So we actually preserve this building, and that's where we store our large artifacts. So we should probably chat about that too.
That's great.
I knew there was a reason we got the.
Yeah, right.
Networking. Yeah.
Well, so speaking of artifacts, both of you have bought a couple of interesting looking things here. I was wondering if you could tell us what they are and show the viewers what they are. Bill, this looks like a register list from the Kelly Stand Hotel. I know that's sort of a duplication of terms. Yeah,
it's the guest register for the Kelly Stand Hotel, which was up on the Kelly Stand Road, off what they call now the Kelly Stand Road. It used to be the Stratton Turnpike is what it was known as. But it is interesting because it starts in 1865 when the hotel was set up. And it records the guests that came in from as far away as Chicago, New York, Boston. Very popular place for dinners and to stay for the weekend, basically. Albany was very popular too. But they recorded all the guests that came through, where they came from. But Kelly, who started the hotel, also did some really bad poetry. They recorded in the back. And we have a transcription of the whole thing that we're getting ready to publish at this point. Okay. There's a lot of local interest about people saying, well, did my great-great-grandfather stay there? So they can actually look that up now and see that. The hotel was on property that was leased to Kelly by a Sunderland family, the Lawrences. And we actually have a few of the plates from the restaurant at the Kelly Stand Hotel that were donated by the Lawrence family descendants, Shirley Letique in Sunderland. Really heavy-duty stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty sturdy.
Those are the types of things that people throw out and they disappear. The book itself was in a barn loft for about 20 years, is what we heard. And it's been 10 years since it was donated. Somebody found it and then donated it a few years ago to the Russell collection. Totally without a cover, it was falling apart. The binding was totally shot. Pages were loose. And one of our volunteers at the collection, Avis Hayden from Sunderland, donated getting it recovered by a fellow in Chester who does that professionally. Is trained in England. So it's a really nice artifact.
And Shawn, what have you brought here?
So one of the things we were fortunate starting at the founding of the Historical Society was Sarah Cleghorn, who's was a well-known writer, poet, friend of Robert Frost, friend of Dorothy Canfield, very close friend of Dorothy Canfield Fisher. The connections between our local area. I mean, the history just doesn't end at our town lines. No. There's so much crossover, which is neat. Sarah kept journals from 1897 through the 1920s. 1924, I think, is the last one she worked on, where she would collect everything from, what the latest fashions were. She clipped, articles from the Journal and other newspapers. Then she would add her own personal commentary. One of the interesting things that I wanted to bring today was in 1912, in August 1912, Theodore Roosevelt came through town. There was a rally in Bennington and a rally in Rutland, and he came
when he was running for president.
He was running for president. It was a three-way race between Theodore Roosevelt, Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. And of course, Taft was Roosevelt's vice president, and they had a bit of a falling out. And anyway, we won't get too far in the weeds with that. But what's nice is we have photos of people gathered, in the green, which is where the Soldiers' Monument in front of the Congregational Church, and then a picture of Roosevelt. He basically stood up in the back of his car, gave a talk to the people in the Equinox House, and sat back down, and off he went 20 minutes later. And she arrived and she gave her, her view on it, and she said, the editor of the journal gives a very cool account of the visit of Colonel Roosevelt. Wasn't a fan. One of the things that was funny was she said one of the summer cottagers came and remarked, "I only came to see his teeth," because Roosevelt had a very brilliant smile, So, interesting observation. And then, on October 9th and 10th, Taft came. He was on a 6-day tour of New England. He stopped up at the Taft homestead to see where his father was born. So, his father was actually President Grant's Attorney General. So anyway, there's a little factoid for you. And he was born up in West Townsend. You drive by and you see a little plaque. Yeah. Right. So Taft had come to Manchester on a tour, and then he stayed with his friend Robert Todd at Hildene. And so Sarah was there, and we have a photograph of Taft in the presidential limousine in front of the Equinox, and then she gave her views on. He gave a talk in the former music hall on Union Street to 700 people, and she was able to stay. And then afterwards, he stood in a receiving line and shook everybody's hand as they went by, and she was able to shake his hand and say, "Thank you for what you've done for peace." And Taft retired to Hildene for the night, but so having these little moments from a firsthand experience of what it was like really been has been interesting, because what you read in the newspaper article is interesting, but then you kind of get the kind of the true color of what was going on.
The feel for what.
Yeah, exactly. And
the mainstream press wasn't reporting it accurately here?
Maybe what they put in and what they left out, especially the stuff they left out. So
okay.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. Well,
Can I interject?
Sure.
It was interesting when I learned you were bringing the Cleghorn, because we had a collection of plates, glass plate negatives, that were donated by Harry Herbert Congdon's family. He started coming here in Arlington around 1905. But he took some photographs, and one of the photographs was Dorothy Canfield Fisher, John Fisher, Sarah Cleghorn, and Herbert Wheaton Congdon around 1911, which I thought tied right in with what you had there. And it was just, the connection between the towns and the, like you said, the relationship between the artists is amazing. It's really not, I don't feel it's been exposed enough.
Well, what do you both feel is the most sort of interesting thing about when you study the history of our area here that emerges? Is it kind of the way the culture developed, or the way the economy of the area developed, or some of the things that happened? I guess is there something that really just stands out, or just really makes it just this kind of work so interesting that you really just want to keep going with it and keep learning more about it? Is there anything just stands out, or is it all just sort of all kind of intriguing all the way from 1760 whatever until the present?
I mean, for me, what I've noticed is that the families, that we had, the families, the prominent families down to the to the salt of the earth people, they in a lot of ways, the projects they worked on, the investments they made in the community to transcend what was happening that day. There's a, for instance, planting, I just drew a total blank on his name, the doctor in the 1780s who planted all the elm trees along Main Street, planting a tree for shade you'll never sit in. Just simple things like that, yet, that made such an impression. And then when you see 50, 80 years later, I mean, the stately elms on Main Street were an attraction until Dutch elm came along. But to the Canfield family, who played such prominent roles to to the people who arrived here and made significant investments in infrastructure, all throughout the millennia, is just has just always astounded me. I mean, what I do, and I don't know if you feel the same. I mean, it's all here. I don't have to come up with any original ideas, or it's just really, reading through and discovering what was common knowledge back then, and then trying to share it with the public.
Yeah. I think that's a similar feeling I get, and it's fun to discover things that people don't remember. I did a history of Arlington, and it took me about 6 years because I kept going through the records, and we have a lot of early records, and the things that people have forgotten are amazing. There was a proposal when they built the Erie Canal to build the Battenkill Canal from the Hudson River right up through Manchester to the end of the Battenkill. That would have changed the whole tenor of the whole Battenkill area in the valley. Nobody knows about it. The trade, the way the trade changed with the railroads, and going from the focus being towards Albany and Troy for bringing goods, and with the railroad coming in, going north and south in that case, changed the whole tenor of travel and who was exposed. Families are still here. The Hawley family was instrumental in Arlington, credited with the founding of the Episcopal Church in Vermont was Captain Jehiel Hawley, and the Hawley's still around. The family's in the area still, and that just amazes me. That's quite a long life, and especially the kids aren't aware of some of these things. It's too bad. Pride of place.
That's what. Do you ever uncover any information about what the area was like before European settlers first arrived here, when and the indigenous people were here? I mean, I often find myself as I drive around wondering, gee, I wonder what it was like 400 years ago here. I mean, were the roads we're driving on, were they pathways or trails that those folks had carved out, or was it all just sort of forest? And I just wondered if in the course of some of the research that you've done and materials you turned up, is there any information that you've gathered about that time before, let's say, 1730, I guess?
So in our collection, I mean, it's very little. I mean, there's a few brief documented mentions. We know that it was a transient area. We know they came along the Battenkill in the center, right around where the bookstore is today, Northshire bookstore. There was a Native American, campground or place where they would stay on overnights, but that would have been wiped out. One of the first things that probably would have been, gone. Now, arrowheads have been found, especially in the southern part of town near the border. Roger Pruce, who owned Equinox Valley Nursery, as he would till the field, got very good over the years at being able to see them down in the dirt and would pick them up. And we have a few of them. The Lathrop family who lived just down there by the border. We have a few arrowheads in the collection. So so we have the incremental evidence that they were here, but nothing of any substance really to say this is where they were, this is where they stayed. I think they just came through.
Yeah. The evidence that we've uncovered is that Indians in our area primarily, they were not Abenaki, they were Mohicans from along the Hudson River. And they would come up during, especially summer, and follow the Battenkill and kind of summer along here and hunt and fish. A lot of arrowheads in Arlington have been discovered. We have a nice display of arrowheads from the fields there. The other description is people coming up to settle after the French and Indian War. The north-south activity in the French and Indian War exposed a lot of people to the area. And say, oh, look at land, and we could live here. They followed Indian trails up, is the description, from Connecticut up through Massachusetts and this part of the state. And then they widened those trails for actually being able to handle carts. It's like going from a lane to more of a throughway or a boulevard to make sure traffic was easy. But there are descriptions of some of that activity that are interesting.
It's always intrigued me. I kind of wonder, where I lived myself. What was it like? Back then, there's lots of trees. What was going on?
It was described as treed. Lots of trees.
The other thing I find myself wondering about is, we have a lot of written documents. And imagine you have a lot of letters that people wrote. Kind of give some insights into what was going on at a particular point in time. How is that going to operate, let's say, historians of the future, when they're going to be working with much more digital resources? Like, let's say, emails that people might have sent to each other about, hey, what did you think about such and such? And I find myself wondering, gee, is the software of 100 years from now going to be able to even read that? I mean, I find, some of I run across some of the early digital things I had back in the 1990s, and it's my laptop says, "Sorry, dude," you know.
Yeah.
So I wonder, do you think that's going to be a problem for historians of the future to kind of decipher the past, you know, the war we're living in now, and will they be able to have information that right now we can get from old letters and handwritten, tangible documents?
I mean, I think there's going to be, you know, I think it's going to be an industry. I mean, regardless of the type of media you have, say if you have media that's 40 years, floppy disks. I mean, actually, I have a box at home that still has some floppy disks in it. You know, there are specialty companies out there who will do it. You know, VHS tapes, you can do the digital conversions, or, you know, that'll be able to be converted to whatever kind of technology. I think so. The ability will be there. The storage of that, you know, how do you capture that, you know, and trying to capture, you know, like today, for instance, having just come through the pandemic, you know, we made sure that we saved a lot of, you know, the ephemera and things, you know, all those things you were handed out about what to do and things that we saved from the school, because when this all happened, everybody came to us saying, what do you have about the 1918, you know, Spanish flu? And we had nothing. And even the Manchester Journal, it was just a couple little notes, and we know it was here. You know, so-and-so was sick and so-and-so passed away, and, you know, there were little anecdotal stories, but really no, you know, no like cache of this is how it was handled here, outside of, you know, things were canceled. So keep collecting today, you know, the hard materials, you know, the hard assets is something that we're trying to do, because we try to make sure that, you know, 100 years from now, I don't want the curator of the Historical Society, why didn't they keep anything? What was the matter with them?
Yeah.
I don't want to go on whatever version of social media is and try to, you know, dig all that out. And, you know, so we try to keep as much as we can for today. And I go around and take photos of streetscapes and how buildings that are getting torn down and new ones that are going up, and, you know, just do the random shots of Main Street, which, you know, when I look at pictures of Main Street in the 1930s, I go, oh, thank God that we have these, you know. So I'm trying to do that as well.
Yeah. I think it's a real problem. What I find is that a lot of the research that people do for history goes to published resources, and that you lose that flavor that Sarah Cleghorn recorded in her you know, nice collection of diaries here. The problem is, how do you capture those from, you know, the guy that lives down the street that's talking about how scared he is with his you know, wife who has some kind of disease and he doesn't know what it is. And that personal connection is missing in a lot of that electronic material. How do you get past that? So whether we preserve the electronic material or not, we lose that personal touch, even though we have that digital collection. How do people feel? You know, what?
Interesting to see.
It's tough.
For better or worse, you can usually figure it out by going on social media. You definitely get the personal insights.
Right.
Now, how that's, you know, how that's preserved. I mean, you know, so this, you know, here's a great example. This, you know, this would be a nice social media post. You know,
Exactly.
The president was here, and what a charming gentleman. You know,
65 likes, 27 comments.
yeah, and 141 characters or less.
Yeah, 1 million followers.
You know, one of the things actually, the worries that actually I've thought about and have shared with people, I'm also a trustee at the Dellwood Cemetery Association, and having watched, you know, burial, you know, rituals have changed. You know, a lot of people now, they're cremated and their ashes are spread and, you know, wide away in a grave. And, you know, there's going to be an enormous hole in the genealogical record, because, you know, we still get so many people who are coming and want to know, is so-and-so buried here? And, you know, that hard chunk of stone with a name carved in it, you know, is proof that they were here.
Right.
And, you know, over the last 30, 40 years, that's really kind of fallen out of favor. And, you know, there's people in my family and, you know, people I know, I say, you know, when they get cremated, and I say, oh, and they're gone. So 100 years from now, I remember them, but when I'm gone, you know, people will come back and say, well, what happened to them?
I've noticed the same thing. Past month, I started transcribing cemetery records for Arlington, and you go through the records and they're burials, but they're increasing numbers of cremations, so you get 4 cremations in a lot. But yeah, what do you do with the person that has their ashes scattered along the long trail?
You still have their names, right? And,
well, you have
dates
the
of
death
birth
certificate.
and death and all that.
Yeah, death certificate, birth certificate, but still people look for that place, that the physical place where they can attach their heart and their emotions and relationship.
But I suppose there's a reason for that, though, isn't there? I mean, there's a finite amount of space for graveyards, right? And at some point, wouldn't they kind of get maxed out? And
yeah, absolutely, to a degree. And there's records that are kept, by cemeteries. There's internment ledgers, and even over in Europe where you only have maybe 100 years, and then you go out into the catacombs and a new person goes in. Yeah. But there's a record of that. And even though births and deaths are recorded, say, by the town, you can't go in and ask to look at the birth, especially after 9/11. And for identity theft, you can't go in and request to look at the death records because that's how people's identities get stolen.
Yeah, there's a time limit.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when you could go and look at the marriage and birth and up to a certain point. But right now, if I wanted to go in and say, "Can I see the records on everybody who was born in 2010?" I know she'd probably be like, "Yeah, not really."
But the names of the people that have passed on are available.
Yeah,
just not the detail.
Wow, it's all so fascinating. I was wondering, before we have to run, how often do you meet with your people? Do you guys have regular meetings that you get together with that, let's say folks who are watching this and might decide, hey, that sounds fascinating, I want to go. Are there regular meetings where they could show up and become part of the efforts of your respective groups?
Well, for the Manchester, the board meets on a regular basis. We have events and gatherings where people, and we have a presence on, social media where there's a tremendous amount of interaction. So we're very easy to find. We do, before the pandemic, we had once a year where we invite everybody, and we want to do that again this year with to celebrate the 125th. And then I know that you've been spearheading a way to get everybody together.
We've things fell off during the pandemic shutdown, and we're starting to pick up with monthly meetings for the Arlington Historical Society. And part of that is we're meeting the fourth Sunday in the month at this point. But also in terms of planning for the 250th anniversary celebrations of Vermont and the nation. We want to get a head start on that and coordinate events. What historic places do people feel we need to recognize and mark? What types of events do you want to hold? The Remember Baker play, last summer was one of those events, and that string leading up to the 250 event total.
So this will be in 2026, I suppose. This will all be starting. And
26, 27.
Yeah. That would be the 2027 would be the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bennington. It was going to be quite a big deal.
Yeah, we're in touch with a lot of the reenactors because we'd like to do a large encampment in Manchester and kind of bring it back to Ethan Allen days type.
exactly.
And do something like that. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
I think so.
I'll plan to be there with my iPhone.
Yeah.
So
recording it for posterity.
Right. Well, someone's got to do it. Well, gentlemen, thank you again. Boy, we could probably talk about this for a lot longer, but we're going to have to leave it there for today. But I want to thank Bill Budde, curator of the Russell Collection down in the Canfield Library in Arlington, Shawn Harrington, the curator of the Manchester Historical Society in Manchester, and thank you both very much for making the time for this conversation. You make me want to go up to both of your places and start pulling through the files there.
Welcome to volunteer.
Yeah, we have volunteers.
Oh, okay.
Volunteers are always welcome. Be careful.
I knew there was a catch to it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks again. And thanks to all of you for watching. Hope you found our program interesting. And we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day.